Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you back to the second half of this evening's broadcast on Salaam Media, Wednesday night with myself, Azhar Vadi. And obviously, the last few days have seen a lot of interest towards what is taking place in Syria. And we've seen the opposition in Syria moving in with a lightning speed from the one end to the other end, from the north to the south. And as we've seen from the fall of Aleppo to Homs and finally to Damascus, and just how easy the opposition were able to capture the entire country. And as a result, we've seen the abdication by Bashar al-Assad, having left the country, disappearing out of the country. And we need to obviously try to unpack what is playing out in Syria, looking at the dynamics that are playing out. And we were going to have Bilaal, Abdul Kareem, a journalist out of Syria. Unfortunately, he has got connectivity issues, but we do have with us Khalid Bauda, social intifada activist as well. And I'm not too sure whether we've still got Ola Batta on. I know he obviously wanted to be added towards the end of the broadcast, but let's just see how it actually plays out. We've got Khalid Bauda with us, and hopefully Ola Batta will be joining us in a little while. Khalid, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair.
Yes, Khalid, I don't know how much this came as a surprise to you, as it has come to the surprise of many. But as I mentioned, with lightning speed, we've seen what has actually played out in Syria. And we know this is a country, obviously, that has enjoyed brutal repression for a very, very long time. The Assads, in particular, Hafiz al-Assad and his son, who took over after him, Bashar al-Assad, ruling Syria with an iron fist. We've seen the result, we've seen the disastrous consequences, we've seen millions of refugees scattered right across the entire world. And now that we see what has happened in Syria, we've seen an opposition, and also at the same time looking at a country where there are many other foreign players that have got interest. We've got Kurds on the one side, we've got the Turks that are on the other side, and now we've got obviously the opposition, which is made up of a number of factions. Just, did this come to you as a surprise? Was this expected, Khalid?
The rapid pace with which opposition soldiers, with which the Syrian regime fell, came as a surprise. It was, 12, 13 days. You can write a book, 13 days to Damascus, from the start of the first fall and the capture. I think what took, not by surprise, what took the opposition forces, or what gave them more encouragement, was the pace with which the Syrian regime just deserted. And this speaks to the fact that Bashar al-Assad had lost the confidence of people within his army as well. Because we know from discussions that have been ongoing prior to these last 2 weeks with regional players, including Turkey, Qatar, and others, and Bashar was being asked to come together and listen to people and listen to the groups and the opposition groups in the country, to the point where he frowned upon it and then he walked out of a discussion. I think this angered some of the regional players as well. And it has the hand of assistance to a degree from some of the regional players as well. Because, Syria's, Bashar's regime was dependent on foreign assistance. Russia and Iran propped up Bashar's regime, and the fact that they left him at this crucial juncture tells you that they've now secured their interests elsewhere, and Bashar is no longer a key ally of theirs, and they obviously played a part in letting the opposition armed forces just sweep through all of the major cities in Syria, including Damascus. So the speed, once it started taking place, and I was on my phone early morning on the weekend, just following events, and I actually didn't sleep much because of the pace with which Damascus was in sight. And it was something that was unbelievable to many people, to many of us on the outside. But I think more surprisingly, it was unbelievable to the millions of Syrians who live in Syria and the millions of Syrians who have been made refugees by Bashar's regime over the last immediate 13 years. And for those who've been who sought political asylum abroad for many decades before then. So this came as a surprise, and people were actually waking up, kind of pinching themselves to wonder whether this is actually true. You know, I've been following the accounts of many Syrian activists abroad, within Europe and within Syria, and all of them expressed the same shock. Is it really true? Nobody, absolutely nobody, imagined a Syria without the Assad family in power. This was virtually impossible. People in Syria were scared to death, literally, because of the security forces of the Syrian regime, where they place spies amongst the people. So you don't actually know within your community who's actually a spy and who's not. So there's a huge level of distrust amongst people, and therefore any activism, any work of that sort doesn't even take off, because of the fear of what might happen to people, when they actually do take up activism and opposition to the regime. And we've seen that come out with now the exposure of what's been going on in the prisons, in the detention centers, the torture camps that Bashar had set up over the years, and the absolutely shocking horror stories that have been coming out of those detention facilities. It's mind-boggling. Think of the worst horror movie you could ever watch, and this is much worse than that. The stories and the atrocities coming out. I'm sure your viewers and listeners have come across some of them, but some of it is too horrific to even. And this is coming off the back of, not the back of, but we're still in a genocide in Gaza, where we've seen some of the worst atrocities possible, where we've seen children dismembered, we've seen hospitals being blown up. We've seen all types of atrocities, but the stuff coming out of Syria and out of Sednaya prison, the detention facility, has been absolutely atrocious and horrifying.
Well, we always knew about those dungeons that Bashar al-Assad and the brutal repression against the prisoners in particular. And as you pointed out, Khalid, I think it came as a surprise to me, because on Friday, I had spoken to somebody out of Syria, and at that point in time, the opposition had made it to Homs. And before we even knew it, not even 2 days later, and I think our words of the program, the broadcast wasn't even called, and they were already knocking on the doors of Damascus. And this is just how quick and how fast this has actually moved. But the key question here again is, and I know there has been a lot of discussion, there's been a lot of debate. I think you and I are on some of the groups as well, and we are following a lot of these discussions that are taking place. And clearly, there are still many questions that are being asked, the lightning speed, but again, without any opposition, basically, this country was just handed over to the opposition on a golden platter.
So it was coming. Although it happened very quickly, according to reports, and then I've been listening to some of the analysts as well, and I've read into a few reports as well, this was being planned for some time. Because like I said, there were attempts made by regional players to get Bashar to do something positive for his people, which Bashar smirked at. And this angered the regional players. So there was something in the pipeline for some time. There were attempts being made to bring the parties together, because Syria in that form was unsustainable. You've got the Kurdish militias in the northeast. You've got HTS in the northwest. You've got Iranian-backed Bashar's regime in the south. Syria was untenable this way. And then you've obviously got Israeli designs on Syria, because and I think we can jump into one of those misconceptions and debunk one of those, is that with the fall of Bashar al-Assad, now Israel has free reign in Syria. In actual fact, since 1973 was the last time during the war that Syria actually fought against Israel. Since 1973, there's been an agreement in place, including the Russians, So with Syria promising not to do anything with Israel. So even though the Golan Heights is Syrian territory, the Golan Heights is being occupied by Israel for decades now. And Syria hasn't done anything about that. So Syria, in fact, has been protecting Israel's border because not a single bullet, weapon, rocket, missile, projectile has been fired towards Israel, let alone allowing people to use the borders to perhaps fighters go in and go and fight. At least from Lebanon, we had, Hezbollah were firing rockets over. Hezbollah were engaging Israel. Iran sent a flurry of missiles as well to Tel Aviv and other areas in occupied Palestine. So Bashar, in fact, has been a close ally of Israel, even though it might have been unspoken. And, John Saw was a former MI6 intelligence officer, was saying in an interview, which is on Sky, that there was this unspoken understanding between Russia and Israel, where the border would be safe. The border would not be compromised in any way, and Syria and Bashar's regime would actually adhere to that. So Bashar was no friend of the Palestinians because there was this fear that now there's the axis of resistance, the so-called axis of resistance is now broken, and Bashar was a key part of that. Syria and Bashar al-Assad was a key part. They were not a key part of this. They might have allowed weapons to go through their borders to Hezbollah, which is another discussion, but in fact, they protected Israel's border. We're finding now with the opening of the prisons, more than 600 Palestinian detainees, including members of Al-Qassam brigades, were part of the detainees in the Sednaya prison. We know early on, after 2011, in the following year or two, the Yarmouk refugee camp there were heavy massacres being carried out by the Syrian regime. The Yarmouk refugee camp is populated by Palestinians. When Khalid Mish'al, who used to be stationed in Syria, he didn't even speak out harshly against what the Syrian regime had started doing following the uprising, but he questioned it, and he pledged solidarity with the Syrian people. Hamas was then asked to relocate, and we know since then they've been in Doha and in Qatar. So the mask of Syria as being a friend of Palestine is completely fallen off. However, we must make a clear distinction. This is the Syrian regime and not the Syrian people. The Syrian people unequivocally stand side by side with the brothers and sisters in Gaza, and vice versa. The Palestinians stand side by side with the struggle of the Syrians. That's why you're seeing the joy on the streets and the takbirat in the masajid in Palestine and elsewhere for the Syrian people, because it's an aspiration for the people of Palestine. We're seeing our brothers free. This speaks to the hadith, love for your, where you love for your brother what you love for yourself. So they're seeing their brothers live through the fall of a tyrant. And tyrant might even be, it's not an appropriate description, because some of the things that Bashar's regime has done makes the Israelis look like schoolboys. So there's the solidarity with the people on the streets in Syria, with the people on the streets in Palestine, and they want for the other what they have for themselves. So that they're happy for each other's freedom.
Khalid, yes, I see Sister Ola Batta has joined us out of the south of Turkey as well. Sister Ola, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sister Ola, if you could unmute your mic, please. Okay,
can you hear
there
me?
We go. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Yes, Jazakallah khair, and so much for joining us now. Sister Ola, I know you are a humanitarian expert, and Khalid was talking about some of the worst humanitarian atrocities that the people of Syria had to endure, and this is for a very, very long time. And just looking at it purely from a humanitarian perspective as well, and we see these celebrations that have taken place within Syria and also out of Syria. We've seen the refugees right across Europe and in many other parts, those that are in Turkey, those that are in Lebanon. And we see the celebratory mode that these refugees are in at this point in time. And just from your side, with the fall of Bashar al-Assad with the fall of the Syrian regime at this point in time. What has the reaction been?
Actually, the reaction is a kind of mixed uh, feelings. It's happiness, fear, concerns. It's happiness because of the falling of this, we can say, ruined regime even. And it's also the fear of the future of Syria, and it's also the fear about the, we can say, it's the fear about the detainees and the fate of these people that have been kidnapped and now with the unknown fate for years and years. And it's also concerns, we can say, about the transitional, let's say, period, how this period will be done. Because what we have now, actually, what has been left by Bashar al-Assad is a war, let's say, torn, fragmented, impoverished, uh, full of psychological and physical injuries country, a country full of sufferings. So it will be a difficult period and a difficult, we can say, duration. That's why I'm saying that these feelings are full also of concerns. So it's happiness, it's fear, and it's concerns. But we can say that the happiness is on the top for Syrians. It is for the first time that I've been able to see Syrians along all these 12, 13 years in such kind of happiness. People were dancing in the streets. People were rushing to the streets. They were describing the smallest details that they were deprived to do in their normal life. And they are saying that why we've been under such a kind of siege. But on the other hand, this actually time is full of sadness mainly, because we're now seeing what's happening in Sadnaya prison. We are seeing actually what's getting out of this prison and other prisons that have been controlled mainly by Al Assad and Directorate of Intelligence in Syria, that was actually part of Assad regime itself. Uh, it is a full sadness because how the detainees, how the victims, we can say, are getting out is in a very miserable situation. Psychological injuries, physical injuries, uh, people that have lost even of their uh, organs, of their body's parts, people that have lost their minds. We've been able to see this, and actually this has stuck to my mind. One of the people that was arrested in 2012, and he was from Hama. He was at that time a student at the medicine college. While he was going to the exam, he was arrested, and we've been able to see him going out with the victims. The person was not able even to say who he is. He was not able to answer the questions. He is in a very miserable situation. Who is responsible for this? Who should be, let's say, who should be who should be actually uh, I'm sorry, I lost the words. I mean, for these people, sometimes we stay with silence. We cannot even describe what happened to them and how these things happened. So this is now the period that we are in addition also to the we can say confusion that all Syrians now are living in. So it's the falling of Assad, it is the advance of Israel on other parts. It is what Assad has left to us of we can say treasure of corruption. Clearly, how we're going to deal with this. It is the returnees of the IDPs, the displaced people. It is the returning movement also of the refugees. So you can imagine out of what I'm talking about, what kind of confusion and mixed feelings Syrians are living in. But in general, yes, Syrian people are very happy.
Well, shukran for that, Brother Khalid. I think just from what the sister is saying and talking about this transitional period is going to be a very, very difficult period. If one goes by with what has taken place in Libya, what has taken place in Iraq, and again, with the removal of people like Saddam Hussein, and Muammar Gaddafi, and we see these two countries that are in a mess second to none. And I think just looking at the Syrian situation, and Sister Ola speaks about it, and she speaks about the concerns amidst all this joy, this euphoria of getting rid of Bashar al-Assad. But here you have a man who's gone into exile, he's abdicated, and with his billions, and he's going to be in Russia, again, not being held accountable, number one, for what he has actually done to the country and its people. And that is an important aspect as well. But also looking at a country that has been left in a mess second to none. Whether we talk here with militarily, economically, we've seen how the Zionist entity has taken advantage of the situation, their expansionist policy, the Golan Heights taking even more land, a buffer within a buffer or additional buffers as well. And we know that the grand plan for a greater Israel has been, to head to Damascus as well. And putting all of this into perspective, putting it into a pot at this point in time, this transitional phase is not going to be easy for the people of Syria.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I think, there's a few points that Sister mentioned which are so, the emotion is palpable from what she's saying. In terms of some of this, you can't put into words, you can't articulate what the Syrian people are going through, what our brothers and sisters are going through. Just take one example. There was somebody who, and his video has probably gone viral globally. When he was released from prison, from the Sednaya prison, he thought Saddam had liberated Syria. Saddam Hussein had liberated Syria. He was imprisoned by Bashar's father. He'd been in prison more than 40 years, 4 decades. He didn't even know which year it was. Now, this is one example of hundreds of thousands, and it's absolutely beyond comprehension, and it's the worst form of horrors. Some of the atrocities I don't even want to mention. I think the listeners and the viewers would be advised to go and research this for themselves and come to terms with the horrors, because what you're going to see on your social media feeds and what you're going to see on TV, that's what Syrian people are living through. So you have a situation of trauma which takes place over one incident or one event, and there's normally a psychological period afterwards where you get time to unpack this and work through this. Syrians are going through PTSD now for the last 13 years, for atrocities over the last 13 years and beyond. So you can't even begin to imagine the scale of assistance that is going to be required, the healing period for people. Many people didn't know where their family members were. The Syrian security would come around, knock on the door, we want to speak to you for 5 minutes. That was the end. People would disappear for months, some for years, some for even longer. Some would never come back. So this just goes to show, you as a family member, if a relative of yours or a spouse or a child, a son, a daughter just disappears, you don't know where they are. You can't have any closure. It's not just a year, it's 5 years, it's 10 years, it's more. There was another youth last week, his image surfaced, on the weekend. He just disappeared. Nobody knew where he was. In 2014, 2015, he just disappeared. He surfaced 10 years later. Everybody thought he was dead. You can't close off. You don't have closure. You don't know what's happened to your family members. Now, some of the horrors coming out of Sednaya prison, there were multi-level chambers within the prison where detainees were kept, political prisoners. And some of them were locked into a basement. They did not see the light of day. It pains me to say that some of our sisters were raped multiple times. They've given birth to children. They don't know who the fathers of those children are. Those kids that have been born in the dungeons haven't seen the light of day. They haven't seen the light of day. Children have just seen the walls of a prison basement. Then they found a concrete press, a pressing machine, which would literally flatten out human bodies and then dispose of them. They found piles of skeletons within the dungeons, where people's bodies were dissolved in acid. I mean, what depraved minds come up with stuff like this? This is beyond humanity. These human beings don't do stuff like this. This is beyond humanity. So coming back to the point is the families now were looking for any news of their relatives who had disappeared, wherever they may be. Some of them have, alhamdulillah, managed to reunite with some of their people. Others, unfortunately, their family members have passed on. And it's difficult saying this as well, that the family members have passed on, they can have some closure. At least that pain that they've been carrying in their hearts, their absence of family members for so many years, at least there's some form of closure, as painful as it is, that my father or my uncle or my daughter has now passed away. So the rebuild, not just for the government, I mean, that's for the people. On the side of the government, Brother Inayat, there is so much work to be done. And that's why I keep saying to people, do not have unrealistic expectations. Do not place a mountain on the backs of people who have just gotten rid of a dictator. They've got so much to do. Normal services, some services need to resume. The economy is in tatters. People need basics like food. They need medication. They would need electricity. They would need civil services to be running. This is all things that this government would need to put into place, and they need time. They need time to do this. It's impossible for us on the outside, sitting in the comfort of our chairs, armchairs, whether it's in South Africa, whether it's in the UK, in the US, outside of Syria, placing unrealistic expectations on the people of Syria and on this transitional government of Syria to now literally overnight change everything and undo everything that's been done for the last 5 decades. And furthermore, I've heard absolutely ridiculous chatter. So when are they going to liberate Jerusalem? Really? They've just gotten rid of a dictator. Give them time to breathe, subhanallah. Give them time to heal. Give them time to mourn. Give them time to digest what has actually happened. Give them time to understand that there is a Syria after Bashar al-Assad and the Assad regime. And there aren't going to be security forces coming around to just snap up people and take them away where they disappear. So please, lower expectations. Let's be courteous to our brothers and sisters. We're comfortable around the world. We've not experienced an iota of what Syrians have experienced. And that's why they've had to flee.
Yes.
That's why so many have had to flee. We know historically the Palestinians make up the largest refugee population in the world. Syrians, in the space of 3 years, outstripped Palestinians in terms of refugees globally. They are living in Europe. They are living in Turkey. The camps in Turkey. Turkey has done, mashallah, fantastic work in helping Syrians, but it's not sustainable. People can't go on living in camps all their lives. So please, to the listeners, to the viewers, have some patience. Please make dua for your brothers and sisters and help them instead of placing unrealistic expectations on the backs of the transitional government and of the people of Syria. Give them a chance to breathe.
Jazakallah for that, Khalid. Yes, Sister Ola, just to bring you back into the discussion. And, Khalid has actually mentioned so much in terms of 50 years. And how does one actually undo what people have actually been going through for over 50 years? And again, Khalid kept on emphasizing on the point of unrealistic expectations. And for us, again, on the outside, we can sit, we can look at developments that are taking place, we can analyze, we can unpack, we can do whatever we can at the end of the day. But it is the Syrian people alone who know what they've gone through. And just the other day, I was talking to somebody out of Bulgaria, and they were talking about the refugees that are in Europe. And many are still hesitant about coming back because they still have the fear of the unknown. You made mention of this transitional government. We don't know what is actually going to happen. And in the absence of all of this, I'm sure just on your side, the people that you've interacted with, the people that you've been speaking to as well, I'm sure there are many similar sentiments that they are expressing as well.
Actually, it's a kind of, as I mentioned, complicated also situation. Even from the humanitarian intervention itself, because looking at only these 12, 13 years that have passed since 2012, we can say, not even 11, if we are not going to count the 11, until our day, we can say that the majority of infrastructure in the biggest cities in Syria have been destroyed. Leave out Damascus, I mean the city itself, while the suburbs also were destroyed. Homs, Hama, Aleppo, the northern cities, the southern cities, Daraa, etc. Where is the infrastructure in the Syrian community? Actually, neither social infrastructure nor physical infrastructure, financial infrastructure, roads, lights, electricity, all of this is not there. How we're going to expect that people who've been there, let's say, 4 or 5 days ago, are now being able, let's say, to continue their work as well? This is really a big question. And we cannot say that these people would immediately start acting, although, to be honest, now we started to see also some statements against the corruption that the transitional people now, the leading ones, are starting to discover. And this is, by the way, not something that is surprising. We know that the Syrian hierarchy under the regime itself was full of corruption. It was built on corruption, and without this corruption, we wouldn't actually have reached to such degree. So how can we expect that these people would be able to act very, very immediately while they have been in Damascus, let's say, since Sunday? This is really a bigger question, even to the international community and to the international actors. Uh, Going back also to the situation of the IDPs in the camps, even concerning the IDPs, concerning, let's say, the people who are already out of the camps, but also they are IDPs, people wants to give themselves a bit of time. I've witnessed many examples that have been to their cities, to their, let's say, villages. Most of the voices of these people are saying that we were surprised on the status of how our village or city is. In Marat and Naman, for example, we've been there and we've seen how the houses were fully destroyed. So how we are expecting that people would immediately get there? Of course not. Now at least we're expecting from 6 months to a year, where people would be able to assess more the situation, where people actually would guarantee that they would have access to basic services, education, electricity, water. This is one of the most important points that actually we need to guarantee that people are accessing until we say that yes, IDPs would go back. Concerning the refugees, so far actually I'm not sure that we've witnessed any kind of refugees going back from Europe or other countries, but we've been actually seeing people that have been living, for example, Turkey, that going back to Damascus or Aleppo, etc. But this is also based on the status of where you're going back to. Because if you're going back to a city that has not been touched by the massive destruction that was caused by the regime, yes, I would agree with you. But I mean, what about these locations that have been mostly destroyed? For example, the eastern parts of Aleppo city are almost on the ground. What we've been able to see so far, to be honest, on the media is mainly the western parts of the city. I wish someone can Google and do a research about the eastern parts in Aleppo city that have been destroyed and that have been also videoed before the people got out at that time in 2015, 2016. And they can see what city we're talking about. That part only contained million or million and a half people. So how we are expecting that, that there should be a kind of immediate reactions? Even looking at the international reactions, at the international intervention, so far we see actually a kind of silent word, a kind of observing word to what's happening in Syria. All the world now is observing and watching and waiting to see what will happen next, and after that they will do their intervention. So how we are going to build a lot of expectations on these people that have broken into the city only 4 days ago? It's not a kind of defense for who is there, but it's a kind of use of the logic itself. Sorry, I cannot hear you. You're muted.
Brother Inayat, I think you're on mute.
Yes, there we go. There we go. Yes, sorry about that. From what Sister Ola is saying, she's talking about the international reaction at this point in time, and I think this is very, very important for us to see that we see now some sort of celebratory mode coming through from the international players as well. Yet, Khalid, what we've seen over a period of time, where we've seen the West, for example, which has actually been a major obstacle as well. And again, you know, before his fall, Bashar was actually, where we found the US spent years actually propping him up, normalizing him. We've seen what the Arab League had actually done in terms of readmitting Bashar al-Assad as well, where we saw possibly only Turkey and Qatar obviously opposing this move. And again, when we're talking about the international reaction and where the Syrians find themselves in today at this point in time, I'm not too sure, I'm not too certain whether one can expect a lot. We've seen, a mild condemnation with the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel in even taking over more land and this additional buffer zone that they've created with regard to the Golan Heights as well. So we've seen mild condemnation coming through, and these are just virtually hours after Bashar al-Assad had actually fled the country. And also at the same time, we've seen so many strikes on Damascus. We've seen close on to over 400 strikes that have taken place since Bashar al-Assad has left as well. So all of this actually put together, again, begs the question, what can we expect in terms of international reaction, and more importantly, the support that the people of Syria need right now as we speak?
Brother Inayat, you know, what astounds me, not to a great degree, because we've expected this from the international community. For 13 years, the international community abandoned Syria. When Syria was in need and the Syrian people were in need, the international community, with the exception of one or two countries who assisted, the rest of the international community, who like to lecture us on human rights and on how we should run our lands and what we should do and what our values should be and what our morals should be, these very same hypocrites turned their back on Syria. And they turned their backs on the Syrian people. The revolution started in 2011, the uprising began, and it started off a sincere uprising from the people. It was allowed to fester because then everybody decided to take a piece of the pie and get themselves involved in there, from Russia to militants, to the extreme version of ISIS, to the United States, to Israel, to Bashar, to Iran. Everybody then took a stake of Syria. And everybody started feasting off Syria like it was a dinner table. Western countries, the so-called civilized West, at the forefront of this. So the hypocrisy of theirs is absolutely astounding, because, you know, they'd come in and make comments when it suits them. They'll play international diplomacy when it suits them. But at the darkest hour of the Syrian people, they did absolutely nothing. And when Bashar managed to crush some of the forces, and his security forces started taking more people prisoner and hostage who were part of the revolution, the Syrian people, they welcomed him back as the ruler, de facto ruler of Syria. And as you rightly pointed out, the shocking part was, shocking again now that we can play on the word, was when the Arab League welcomed him back. You know, the butcher of Damascus, the butcher of Syria, they welcomed him back with open arms. So this was a slap in the face of the Syrian people. But we've seen this in Palestine. The people have been slapped in the face of international diplomacy and fancy words that come out of the diplomats from the United States, from European nations, and from some of the Arab nations. And, it's just the people don't matter. The people don't matter. So I personally don't expect much. What I do expect is that we'll see flowery statements. A lot of them are holding back because now they're caught between a rock and a hard place, because according to the West, according to the US and Europe, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is a proscribed terrorist organization, right? But we know terrorist organizations that they proscribe anyone and everyone. Hamas is a proscribed organization by them, as with many other resistance movements. So How are they going to navigate this? That's left to be seen. According to them, according to leaders and diplomats in the West, they're hearing the right things coming out of Hamid al-Jolani. They're hearing the right things coming out of the transitional government, so they want to give it some time to see how it plays out and how it develops. My fear is for the people and the organizations and the countries and the people with evil intentions who are waiting and preying on Syria again like vultures, waiting to see that this project fails now. That's the concern, and this is why I'm stressing on the fact that we need to support the Syrian people, the transitional government, the people of Syria to get back on their feet, however long it takes. Do not put timeframes on them. Do not place unrealistic burdens on their shoulders, but support them in every way, and please stop being armchair critics. We have no idea what it's like. Yes, we can sit and imagine that the geopolitics of it doesn't look good because Bashar was an ally of Palestine, and now because Bashar is gone, Israel has free reign to pursue the Greater Israel project. On that, as Muslims, we need to understand one thing. All of the lands that the Greater Israel project encompasses are lands that the Prophet ﷺ has spoken about collectively as a Sham. These are blessed lands that Allah has blessed in the Quran. So are we, and these lands are promised to the believers, are we going to take Israel's words and Israel's geopolitics and Israel's evil politics over that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Are we going to place Allah's all-knowing and all-seeing and all-hearing abilities on Israel? Are we gonna transfer those attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala onto Israel and America? That all of this is by their doing, nothing happens without America and Israel? No, you are delegitimizing the struggle, the valid and righteous struggle of the people of Syria. Do not do that. Do not delegitimize it from the comfort of your armchairs wherever you are sitting outside of Syria. Support it. Support your brothers and sisters. This is an obligation on us as an ummah. We have a responsibility. We have people with skills in the ummah. We have people, like Sister Ola mentioned, the civil infrastructure is decimated all over Syria. People with engineering capabilities, people with medical capabilities, people with educational capabilities, all of these skills. When the people of Syria are ready to receive your assistance, be ready to go and give your assistance. Be ready for the humanitarian work that's going to be required in Syria. Rather, let's use our energies constructively instead of debating endless nonsense, because what we're getting, yesterday's friends, I'm calling them yesterday's friends, we had the left come out in large numbers, in big voices, in support of Palestine and against the Israeli genocide, and rightfully so. And a lot of them have accumulated massive followings on social media, and they've become de facto spokespeople because they might be from the US or from the UK or from elsewhere. These people have turned their backs now, because in the minds of a lot of simple-minded people, and excuse me if I'm being harsh here, anti-imperialism is limited to the United States, to Europe, and to Israel. In their minds, you cannot have imperial powers in Muslim lands. We've had one of the most brutal dictators this world has seen just fall over the last weekend. So anti-imperialism is not, you need to take your struggle across the board. And truth is truth and justice is justice. So beware of these celebrity voices on social media who've come out in massive support for Palestine, but have now turned their backs on Syria, saying it's all a staged event and it's controlled by Israel and it's controlled by America. Don't delegitimize a valid struggle of the people of Syria.
In fact, I'm glad you actually raised this issue about, who could possibly be behind the opposition. And I've heard similar sentiments as well, Khalid, that, Israel and the United States of America have been at the forefront. But I see Sister Ola, obviously, I think for some reason, for connectivity issues, she has disappeared. But just how big a concern is this, Khalid, that Syria doesn't degenerate into another Iraq or Libya?
It's a valid concern. And we can't be naive because our recent history has taught us that. We've seen this We've seen intervention from other countries, from role players from the West, where they've taken stakes out of certain lands in order to in order to topple certain individuals and then destabilize the entire country, whether it's for natural resources, whether it's for strategic locationing in terms of military bases, or other nefarious reasons. So there is this concern, and it's a valid concern. It's absolutely a valid concern. And I think to be able to leave the Syrian government, the transitional government, and all the role players within Syria, to be able to deal with this, they know best. They know best how to take Syria forward. And they would be well aware. And you see this in the language and in the transition of Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani over the years. Initially having been part of starting the Al-Qaeda branch in Syria, then being amalgamated into ISIS, then breaking away from ISIS because ISIS had broken away from Al-Qaeda, then looking at a Syrian national movement, but not respecting the minorities in Syria, the Christians and whoever else lives in Syria. Then over time, changing that viewpoint to now saying Syria is for all Syrians, irrespective of your religious background, irrespective of your, which part of Syria you live in. This is an inclusive Syria for all Syrians, maintaining at the same time that we are Muslim, the majority of Syria is Muslim, and we're going to look at an appropriate system, but at the same time getting all role players involved. And Sister mentioned earlier about the amalgamation of members of Bashar's cabinet. Some ministers are going to be amalgamated into the new government or into the transitional government if they determine that that's the way forward. So there's a whole lot of, they come with skills, yes, but they come with corruption as well. Again, the Syrian transitional government would know best how to go about this. Yes, there has been foreign assistance. There have been hands in the background. We can see that. We can see Turkey's hand in this. We can see Qatar's support in this. America is sitting back and watching, although we know from how America operates, they would have operatives close by monitoring what's going on. We know Israel has designs on Syria. And an important point that came about in an interview with one of the activists, which I watched earlier today, we know Israel has bombed, as you mentioned, over 200 sites in Syria. In Damascus, they've taken out military installations and they've taken out military sites. And some of these military sites allegedly have files and documentation that are being destroyed. So this begs the question, what documentation is being destroyed by Israel in these attacks, in addition to decimating or limiting the capability of Syria's military abilities? What else is Israel intentionally destroying? Is there information there that the world should know about, and that's why Israel is destroying it? Is there something that's being covered up between Israel and Bashar? Allah alone knows, but these questions are valid questions that some of the Syrian activists have raised.
Yes, and Khalid, I think just finally, you spoke about Turkey, you spoke about Qatar and their support for Syria. We know about Israel and the West, the United States of America. But I'm just talking about the Arab world in particular, and we are looking at obviously some of the major players here. We're looking at the likes of Saudi Arabia, we're looking at the likes of the United Arab Emirates, where in the past we've seen, even in the UAE, where we've seen families of Syrian refugees not allowed, or they were kicked out of the country as well. And we've seen a lot of exploitation of Syrian refugees that had taken place in the UAE. And again, looking at the address by Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, where he spoke about the Ummah, the restoration of the ruling by Islam as well. And we know that, many, Iran obviously is now, obviously we've seen the reaction come out of Iran. But I think more importantly, to understand from Sunni Islam, because, this has become quite a huge debate in terms of the Alawites and the Shias and all of that at the end of the day. But again, here we are talking of an opposition that is made up largely of Sunni Islam. and how are they likely to be accommodated by countries like the Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, possibly even some of the other Gulf states, and even the larger part of the Muslim world?
This is an important question, and it's a very valid question. The movements in Syria are similar to the movements in Palestine. You know, we know from history in Gaza, when Hamas came in, being a strong Muslim foundation in terms of its charter and in terms of its functionality, being elected democratically didn't mean a thing to the West, because Hamas was sidelined almost immediately after coming into power. So again, it's left to be seen how they will respond around the area, because remember, the resistance movements in the region all have their roots in one common area, and that's the Muslim Brotherhood. Whether it's Hamas or whether it's the founding of the current transitional government of HDS, of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, their roots are in the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood is not liked in the region. We know what happened to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. We know what's happened to the Muslim Brotherhood members in Saudi Arabia. The UAE has outstripped Jordan, outstripped Egypt, outstripped Saudi Arabia in terms of their proximity to Israel and America. In fact, it's the most despicable regime, in my opinion, in the Middle East when it comes to providing information and collusion with the United States and with Israel, to the point where one of the Hamas spokespeople, Osama Hamdan, mentioned in an interview not too long ago, when humanitarian aid was sent into Gaza from the UAE, some of those UAE workers, alleged workers, were spotting locations and passing that information on to Israel on where to bomb, on which sites to target. So I don't think, in terms of expectations, there's much expectation. However, there's a political shift and there's a new reality that has set in. So I think Saudi Arabia saw it coming. Qatar saw it coming. Turkey saw it coming. And being the big regional players in the region, even Iran, they saw it coming. It was untenable with Bashar there. They saw that the Syrian people need to form a new way forward and a new pathway forward, and they need to step back. And I think a stable Syria, stable again in inverted commas, would be beneficial to the region. But my fear again goes back to the powers in the region who act at the behest of the United States and of Israel, who wait to destabilize and look at opportunities to destabilize, because they've done that with every single country. So where it's going to go, Allah knows best. Allah knows best. But if Islam is proclaimed as the governance, we could expect a lot more opposition from the West. We can expect the media propaganda to be ramped up. We can expect the political jargon to come out and just all guns blazing against the Syrian government. People are suggesting that they model themselves on what's happened in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is starting to stand on its own feet after 3 or 4 years after kicking the United States out. Allah alone knows which direction this is going to take. And again, coming back to your question at the beginning, we would be naive to think that there isn't a concern. There is a valid concern, because there are evil forces at play who want to see a destabilized Syria. Our role as believers outside of Syria, Syrian allies, for our brothers and sisters, again, I stress on the fact, do not aid the propaganda. Do not aid the propaganda. Get yourself ready in terms of your skills to be able to assist Syria when the doors open, when you are able to go through and assist. And make dua for your brothers and sisters in Syria, that Allah guides the leadership. They're going to make mistakes. They are going to make mistakes. There's 50 years of trauma that people are going to have to work their way through. They're going to make mistakes. Be patient with their mistakes. Be patient with their mistakes. Make dua for them and support them. Amplify their voices. At the end of the day, it's our brothers, it's our sisters in Syria, like it's our brothers and our sisters in occupied Palestine.
Well, Jazakallah khairan so much for that, Khalid. And, I've actually got a message in saying, regardless of the huge efforts and material capabilities of the colonialist enemies and the agents. Allah is dominant in all these affairs. And now is not the time to talk of the strength of the enemies and their cunning. Now is the time to raise the spirit of our Muslim brothers and sisters and to urge them to actually move forward and to rule according to the pleasure and what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think that is very, very important at this point in time, inshallah. And once again, Khalid, jazakallah to you for taking time out. I know it was a short notice, but you took the time out, alhamdulillah, to come and have this all important discussion with us this evening right here on Salaam Media. Allah reward you. Allah accept your efforts. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair.
Yes, Khalid Batta, and earlier on, sadly, we couldn't get hold of Bilaal Abdul Kareem because of connectivity issues, and Sister Ola had to leave as well, unfortunately, due to connectivity issues. But nevertheless, this was some analysis, some insight into the developments of the last few days that have been playing out in Syria. And as Khalid mentioned, let us not have unrealistic expectations, considering that this country has gone through 50 years of trauma, 50 years of horrors, and these horrors we've seen coming out of Syria, particularly in coming out of the prisons as well. So this is a nation that has been suffering, usually suffered the consequences of these tyrants and these dictators and the evil that they have actually brought with them in terms of ruling Syria with an iron fist. And again, it is about justice, and we have trust and hope, and we make dua that justice will be served. Now that Bashar al-Assad has disappeared off the radar, justice again needs to be served. Like Benjamin Netanyahu taken to the ICC as a war criminal, Bashar al-Assad deserves exactly the same. But again, you know, when one looks at the way the workings of the world as well, with a family that is worth billions, at the end of the day, made a huge investments in property in Russia as well, and now just disappearing into the sunset. Really, where is the justice? But at the end of the day, the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will certainly prevail. And with that, I'm going to be signing off. Once again, it's been wonderful being in your company, in the company of our listeners, our viewers, and until we meet again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.